The 4th of July parade in a small town was in full swing, a proud display of patriotism and community spirit. Flags waved, children cheered, and veterans marched down the street, proudly representing their service to the country. The mood was festive, a perfect setting for families and friends to come together and celebrate. But in the midst of the celebration, one moment stood out in a way no one expected. Mr. Thomas, a retired Army officer in his late 70s, was one of the veterans walking in the parade. His posture was strong, his military uniform crisp, but his age was catching up with him. Despite the strain, he had insisted on participating in the parade to honor his fellow soldiers. But as he made his way along the road, Mr. Thomas stumbled. His foot caught on the uneven pavement, and before he could steady himself, he fell, crashing to the ground. The crowd fell silent. What had been a joyful, bustling celebration now felt like an unsettling pause. Mr. Thomas lay on the pavement, struggling to get up. His pride was as wounded as his leg. The once strong and resilient veteran, who had faced battles far greater than a fall, now found himself helpless and vulnerable on the ground. Onlookers hesitated. A few rushed toward him, unsure of how to help. But just as the situation seemed to escalate into confusion, a figure appeared on the scene, unexpected and calm, ready to make the difference. The town's 4th of July parade was a tradition as old as the town itself. It was a time for the community to come together, celebrate the country's independence, and honor the brave men and women who had served in the military. The parade route was lined with families, veterans, and local groups, all adding to the celebratory atmosphere. For many, the veterans were the heart of the parade. These men and women, some in their uniforms, others dressed in casual clothes, proudly walked in the parade to receive the appreciation and respect they had earned through years of service. Mr. Thomas, a longtime resident of the town, had been involved in every parade for decades. Although now in his late 70s, he was determined not to let his age stop him from honoring the nation and his fellow soldiers. He walked proudly despite the discomfort in his joints and the growing fatigue in his legs. His body was slower, but his heart was as full of pride and love for his country as it had ever been. Though the parade had been a festive occasion up until that point, the sudden fall of Mr. Thomas turned it into a moment of reflection. The older generation, those who had seen and experienced so much for their country, were no longer the youthful, strong individuals they once were. It became evident in that instant how fragile life could be and how much our veterans had sacrificed. The scene shifted from joyful celebration to one of concern and respect, with the crowd now uncertain of how to respond to this vulnerable moment. Mr. Thomas had walked many miles in his time, but the years had taken their toll. His steps had slowed, and the simple act of participating in the parade became a challenge. It wasn't that he didn't want to be there, it was that his body was no longer as strong as it once had been. But he pushed through, determined to honor those who had come before him and to stand tall for the country he had fought for. For him, being part of this celebration was more than a tradition. It was a symbol of his lifelong commitment to service and sacrifice. As he moved down the street, there was a noticeable struggle in his pace. His breaths were heavier, and he paused more often to steady himself. Still, Mr. Thomas kept walking with as much dignity as he could muster. He wasn't going to let age or exhaustion defeat him. His determination was visible, but it was also clear that this kind of physical exertion was difficult for him. The pain in his legs, the weariness in his chest, it was all too much. At that moment, the crowd continued to cheer, unaware of the effort Mr. Thomas was putting forth. He smiled politely at the onlookers, masking his discomfort. But to those who were close enough to see, it was evident that he was struggling. Some people might have stopped to help, but most kept their distance, not understanding the depth of what Mr. Thomas was going through. They saw a proud veteran marching in a parade, not the man who had put his life on the line for his country, struggling with the weight of age and injury. Mr. Thomas continued forward, determined to finish what he had started. But with each step, it became harder for him to keep up. His body was telling him it was time to stop, but his heart kept pushing him forward. As the parade route neared its midpoint, he took one more step, and that was when his foot caught the pavement, and he fell. The moment Mr. Thomas fell, time seemed to slow for everyone present. His body hit the pavement with a dull thud, and for a brief second, the entire parade route fell silent. The jubilant mood that had filled the air moments earlier was replaced by stunned gasps as onlookers froze in shock. The veterans walking beside Mr. Thomas came to an abrupt halt, their faces showing concern as they glanced down at their fallen comrade. The crowd, once engaged in the festivities, now turned their attention to the fallen veteran. His pride had been injured just as much as his leg, but it was his vulnerability in that moment that made the situation even more painful. Mr. Thomas, lying on the pavement, winced in pain. His legs were unable to lift him back up, and though his spirit remained strong, his body was no longer as resilient. He didn't want to make a scene. He was more concerned with the attention his fall had drawn than the pain in his leg. The crowd continued to look on, some unsure of how to act, others too shocked to move. A few of the veterans who had been marching beside him stepped forward, offering their hands, but there was hesitation, a clear moment of uncertainty about how to handle the situation. The parade momentarily paused, with the marching bands, the fire trucks, and the floats halting in their tracks as people began to gather around Mr. Thomas. This was not the moment anyone had anticipated for this day of celebration. What had been a jubilant scene now turned somber as the harsh reality of aging, health issues, and vulnerability became apparent in the presence of a proud man who had served his country decades ago. What followed, however, was not just the concern of onlookers, but an unexpected intervention that would alter the trajectory of this difficult moment. Just as the air became thick with concern and uncertainty, a calm figure emerged from the crowd. Melania Trump, standing nearby to observe the parade, noticed the situation unfold and immediately approached with a quiet and composed demeanor. Despite the chaos surrounding Mr. Thomas's fall, Melania moved towards the scene without hesitation. Her presence was unexpected, and there was an air of anticipation as she walked purposefully through the crowd. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, her poise and grace immediately setting her apart as she navigated the crowd to the fallen veteran. There was something about Melania's composure in that moment that caught the attention of everyone nearby. As the crowd parted to make room, Melania knelt beside Mr. Thomas without a word, her focus entirely on him. Her calm presence seemed to immediately change the tone of the situation. Where the crowd had been tense and unsure of how to act, Melania's approach brought a sense of quiet authority. She didn't rush. Instead, she took her time, her demeanor grounded and comforting. With gentle hands, Melania placed a reassuring touch on Mr. Thomas's shoulder, speaking to him softly as she helped him steady himself. It wasn't just her actions that made the moment so powerful, but the way she approached the veteran with empathy and dignity. She didn't treat the situation like a spectacle. There were no grand gestures or dramatic speeches. Instead, she focused on Mr. Thomas's well-being and made sure he was comfortable before moving him from the pavement. The simplicity of her intervention was stunning. She was there to help, not to draw attention to herself, and that subtlety made her presence even more impactful. The crowd watched in silence, their earlier concern now giving way to a sense of awe. Melania's unexpected involvement made a profound statement about respect, compassion, and the importance of honoring those who have served. Melania's quiet kindness toward Mr. Thomas in that moment was extraordinary, not only because of the action itself, but because of the dignity and grace with which she approached the situation. As she knelt beside the elderly veteran, she placed a hand on his shoulder, reassuring him that he was not alone. Her presence was a source of calm in the midst of chaos, providing the comfort and support that Mr. Thomas needed. She helped him to his feet slowly, ensuring he was steady and comfortable before moving him to a safer area. The crowd, now watching this act of compassion unfold, began to realize the true impact of Melania's gesture. This was not just an instance of someone offering help. It was an act that restored the veteran's dignity in front of the whole community. Mr. Thomas, who had been embarrassed and vulnerable moments earlier, now felt the weight of kindness and respect as Melania's soothing presence calmed him. There was no rush, no pressure, just a simple, sincere act of care for a man who had spent his life serving others. Her kindness was not performed for applause or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. By helping Mr. Thomas, Melania not only supported him physically, but also emotionally. In a moment where his pride had been hurt, she helped him maintain his sense of self-respect. an important and often overlooked aspect of providing help. As Mr. Thomas sat down to rest, Melania remained beside him for a moment longer, talking to him softly, ensuring he was comfortable before helping him to a nearby bench where he could regain his composure. She didn't rush the moment. She didn't leave him in haste. She gave him the space and time he needed to recover, both physically and emotionally. It was a simple act of empathy, but one that left a lasting impression on the crowd and everyone who witnessed it. As the moment unfolded, the crowd's reaction began to shift from concern to admiration. Initially, the crowd had been frozen, unsure of how to respond to Mr. Thomas's fall. But as Melania stepped in with such grace, everything changed. A wave of relief washed over the onlookers as they realized that someone was finally stepping up in a way that was not only helpful but dignified. The shock that had initially gripped the parade route began to dissipate, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for Melania's intervention. Many of the people who had been hesitant to approach the fallen veteran now found themselves inspired by Melania's example. What had been a moment of discomfort turned into an opportunity for others to reflect on how they too could make a difference in moments of need. The simplicity of her act, the way she approached Mr. Thomas with such respect and kindness, was something the crowd would remember long after the parade had ended. Some people in the crowd began to murmur their appreciation, while others exchanged looks of silent approval. A few began to clap, acknowledging not only Melania's intervention, but the way she had handled the situation with such poise. There was a shift in the air. What had been a tense and uncomfortable moment now became one of unity and collective respect. It wasn't just about the individual act of helping. It was about how Melania's intervention reminded everyone of the importance of showing compassion to those in need. In a setting where many had been too absorbed in the festivities, Melania's action made them pause and reflect on their role in the community. It wasn't just a display of kindness toward one person. It was a reminder that kindness is something that can be extended to everyone, no matter their status, age, or situation. Her presence had the power to change the energy of the entire parade. As Melania helped Mr. Thomas to the side and ensured he was comfortable, the parade resumed, but the mood had shifted. What had been a festive, patriotic celebration now also felt like a collective acknowledgement of the humanity in each of us. Melania's simple act of kindness, without fanfare or self-interest, had turned a troubling situation into a powerful lesson about respect and empathy. Once Mr. Thomas was seated and visibly more at ease, he looked up at Melania with a mixture of surprise, relief, and gratitude. His eyes glistened as he looked at her, and he repeatedly thanked her for what she had done. His pride had taken a hit, but her intervention had restored much more than just his ability to stand. It had brought him dignity in a moment where he could have easily been overwhelmed by shame and helplessness. Melania, with her usual composure, smiled gently and placed a hand on his arm in a reassuring gesture. "It's my honor to help," she said softly. "You've given so much for our country, and you deserve respect and care." The sincerity in her voice was evident, and in that moment Mr. Thomas understood that her words were not just a gesture. They were a deep acknowledgement of the sacrifices he had made in his lifetime. The connection between them in that brief moment spoke volumes. There was no grand speech or public acknowledgement of Melania's role in the moment. Instead, there was a quiet and meaningful exchange that transcended words. Mr. Thomas had spent his life serving his country, and here, in this small act of kindness, he was shown respect not just as a soldier, but as a person. The crowd who had been watching the scene unfold could see the genuine nature of their interaction. It wasn't about a public figure helping a veteran for the sake of appearance. It was about acknowledging the humanity in each other. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that kindness and empathy were values that transcended circumstance or status. For Mr. Thomas, it wasn't just about getting back on his feet physically. It was about being seen and respected in a way he hadn't expected. The moment between Melania and Mr. Thomas created a bond that felt timeless. It reminded everyone that small acts of compassion have the power to heal, and that sometimes the most meaningful thing you can offer someone is not just physical help, but emotional support and a genuine acknowledgement of their worth. As the parade continued, the ripple effect of Melania's act of kindness began to spread beyond the immediate moment. The story quickly caught the attention of the crowd, and before long, it was circulating on social media. News outlets shared the story, praising Melania for her grace and compassion. Her act of kindness didn't just go unnoticed, it became a symbol of empathy in a time when it can sometimes feel scarce. People from all over the country began to share the story, with many expressing their admiration for how Melania handled the situation. The hashtag had Respect Our Veterans trended, and social media users began to reflect on how they, too, could practice kindness in their daily lives. What started as a single, quiet interaction grew into a larger movement of goodwill, inspiring others to engage in acts of kindness, especially toward those who may not always be seen or appreciated. Melania's example resonated with many, especially those who had witnessed the struggles of veterans or those in need of help. The narrative surrounding Mr. Thomas's fall became more than just a moment at a parade. It became a reminder that our actions, no matter how small, can make a profound difference in the lives of others. Melania's kindness was simple yet profound, and the ripple effect was clear. Her actions sparked a renewed commitment to empathy in those who heard her story. In the wake of the parade, veterans organizations and community groups began discussing how they could better care for aging veterans. Local businesses, inspired by Melania's example, pledged to create initiatives to support veterans' health and well-being. The story became a rallying cry for communities to come together and take care of those who had given so much for their country. Melania's role in this small moment reminded everyone that leadership doesn't always have to come in the form of grand gestures. Sometimes the most impactful acts are the quiet ones that happen when we choose to be kind, even in difficult situations. Her empathy inspired a broader sense of responsibility and care that went beyond just honoring veterans during holidays. It was about making kindness a daily practice. In the months following the parade, Melania's simple yet powerful gesture continued to have a lasting impact. Communities began to take notice and reflect on how they could better support veterans in their lives. Local volunteer efforts started to emerge, with groups organizing to offer assistance to elderly veterans. Whether it was through transportation, meals, or just offering companionship, communities began to adopt small but meaningful ways to honor their veterans every day, not just on national holidays. What Melania's act of kindness had done was reignite a spirit of care that stretched beyond one singular event. Veterans were no longer seen as distant figures to be remembered on specific days. They were recognized as individuals who deserved dignity, respect, and care in every moment. This shift in perspective began to create a movement where communities began to foster stronger relationships with veterans, ensuring they felt valued and supported. In the wake of the parade, the ripple effect continued. The positive actions inspired by Melania's example encouraged more organizations to prioritize veterans' needs, helping to ensure that they had access to the resources and assistance they required. The emotional and physical well-being of veterans was no longer a secondary consideration. It became a central focus for many organizations and community groups. Melania's involvement in this simple yet profound moment served as a reminder that leadership can come in unexpected ways. A gesture of kindness, even in a moment of uncertainty, can leave an indelible mark on a community and inspire real, lasting change. By offering her help with grace and humility, Melania had started a new tradition of care, one that would continue to inspire others to recognize the sacrifices of veterans and honor them with acts of kindness every day. In the days and weeks that followed the parade, the story of Melania's compassionate acts spread far beyond the local community. The news media picked up on her kindness, and her simple, yet profound intervention became a symbol of what true leadership and empathy look like in action. It wasn't just her status that made this story noteworthy. It was her genuine, selfless behavior that left a lasting impact on everyone who witnessed it, either in person or through media coverage. For many, this was not just an inspiring story about a former First Lady helping an elderly veteran. It was a wake-up call about the importance of compassion and kindness in our everyday lives. Her actions were a reminder that helping others, especially those who have sacrificed so much, should not be a grand gesture or something that is only reserved for special occasions. It should be a part of our daily interactions, woven into the fabric of how we treat each other. The ripple effect from this incident was palpable. People who had heard about Melania's actions began sharing their own stories of kindness and compassion on the social media, using hashtags like #KindnessMatters and #HonorOurVeterans. These stories spread quickly, further highlighting the collective impact that small, caring actions can have on society. Melania's gesture became more than just an isolated event. It became a movement that reached people across the country, inspiring them to look for ways they could honor and help those around them. Local organizations, especially those dedicated to supporting veterans, took notice of the momentum generated by this simple act. They began organizing events and outreach programs aimed at providing assistance to veterans, offering everything from rides to appointments to social events where veterans could connect with one another. The conversations sparked by Melania's kindness were no longer limited to social media. They started taking shape in communities all over the country. Local businesses also took the opportunity to give back, offering discounts, free services, and support to veterans and their families as a way to honor their service. Melania's response to Mr. Thomas's fall exemplified the kind of leadership that doesn't seek recognition, but instead works quietly behind the scenes to make the world a better place. The humility and grace with which she approached the situation left a lasting impression on the public. It demonstrated that anyone, no matter their position, can make a profound difference by simply doing what is right, especially when it comes to showing respect for others. In the years that followed, the story of Melania's actions continued to inspire new generations. Schools began using her example in educational materials to teach children the value of empathy, kindness, and honoring those who serve their country. It wasn't just about celebrating veterans on holidays. It was about recognizing their humanity every day and offering them the same respect and kindness that Melania showed Mr. Thomas. The lasting impact of that single moment on the parade route was a reminder of the power of one person's action. The story went on to be shared in speeches, charity events, and various community initiatives. Melania's example had become a model for how to integrate kindness into leadership and how empathy can be a powerful tool for building stronger, more supportive communities. Her act of kindness, while small in the context of the grand parade, ultimately became part of a larger story, a story that reminded everyone of the importance of looking beyond ourselves and helping those who have given so much to their country. Through this act, Melania Trump's legacy of compassion continues to inspire, setting a new standard for how we treat others, especially those who may be in need or have been overlooked. The story of Melania's unexpected kindness to Mr. Thomas is a testament to the fact that even in a world often filled with distractions, the simple acts of empathy and respect still have the power to change lives and inspire others to do the same. Her example lives on, not only as a singular act of kindness, but as part of a much larger movement toward a kinder, more compassionate world.